In the world of ideas, there is one quality that is absolutely indispensable, one thing you absolutely cannot do without, and that's intellectual honesty. What the crypto space is starting to realize is that among the top Gen 3 blockchain contenders, intellectual honesty may not be a given, and engaging in intellectual dishonesty may not quite get you across the finish line. Ready? Let's go. We're going to talk about intellectual honesty, but first we've got a huge number of news items to cover because the Cardano ecosystem is so busy right now. We're going to talk about Zimbabwe, COTI Partnerships, a Cardano project in Timesquare, a Lars class in Ghana, a new NFT market claiming smart contracts and creator royalties, and us finally getting the NFTs from the Cardano summit. Nation state adoption of crypto is not going to slow down. It's just going to keep ramping up. Here we see that Zimbabwe apparently is talking to private sector consultants about legalizing Bitcoin. This is extremely interesting because one of the rallying cries of crypto has always been this. In fact, I believe this is one of the images used by Plan B in sort of describing, his sort of crypto ethos. This is the $100 trillion note that I believe Zimbabwe may have issued. I just looked these up and you can actually buy these. You can buy a 2008 $100 trillion note from Zimbabwe. And of course, this represents the whole inflation phenomenon. Nation states get in trouble. They need to pay off their debts. Their debts are enumerated in a currency, a fiat currency they control. So what any rational economic actor would do, they inflate that fiat currency like crazy so as to devalue their debts. So kind of fitting that everything's come full circle now, and we even see Zimbabwe talking about adopting crypto. And like we've talked about in the past, it makes sense. When most people come into crypto, the first thing they encounter is Bitcoin, and they might go out and try to figure out how they can buy some Bitcoin first. We're seeing the same thing with nation states. Bitcoin is our gateway drug. It looks like we're going to be getting some news about a new COTI partnership with the Cardano Foundation. Apparently, we'll also be getting news about an additional partnership with IOHK on top of the Cardano Foundation partnership. So needless to say, it looks like COTI is very busy. Congratulations to the SpaceBudz ecosystem. Right now, through the 14th of this month, they're appearing on the gigantic NASDAQ screen in Times Square. IOHK issued a blog article about the Haskell program they're going to run in Ghana. This is going to be a class. And apparently, I believe Charles has told us in an AMA that Lars is actually going to move down there. So they're going to do this Haskell class. It's going to be a cohort of 80 students. This, to me, when I see things like this, like not just happening occasionally as a one-off, but Cardano constantly doing stuff like this, like it's no small effort for a guy like Lars, who works at a company like IOHK, to actually move to Africa and run classes like this. Cardano is actually putting their money where their mouth is. So I'm always super happy to see this because IOHK and the Cardano Foundation and Mergo and Cardano as a whole, they don't just talk the talk. They're actually out there doing the thing. And you notice there's a pattern here. In Ethiopia, Cardano came in, delivered value. They delivered this course so that there'd be this base of developers in Ethiopia who'd have exposure to Haskell, who might not have had that exposure if Cardano hadn't come in and taught that class. Lo and behold, a couple of years later, Cardano was able to strike a deal with the Ethiopian Ministry of Education. Actually, I don't know what the exact time period between the Ethiopia class and the deal was, but it's pretty sequential. We see Cardano come in and deliver value in these nation states like Ethiopia and Ghana and Mongolia. And then down the road, they're able to strike a deal with the government. Here in this paragraph in this article, we see this course couldn't come at a more timely moment for the country. Ghana is currently driving the digitization of some of its key economic areas. Bank of Ghana, for example, is working toward the development of a blockchain-based digital currency. So you can see there's not a lack of strategy with these classes. I think Cardano realizes sort of a a generally true principle of human nature. If you come in and deliver value to a person or a group of people or a nation state, they're going to look positively upon you when it comes time to form a much larger partnership that won't just be your blockchain project giving value to the country, but will be mutually beneficial for everybody involved. We have a new NFT marketplace on the scene. We saw this little thread kind of come out of the blue from at JPEG Store NFT. They say, "Hey, Cardano, we have a big announcement to make. We just launched the first general NFT marketplace to support smart contracts." I know a lot of you are jumping out of your chairs and saying, "What about the SpaceBudz marketplace?" I thought the whole thing was that involves smart contracts as well. Regardless of what you think about those issues, what's really interesting to me down here is this little post. Our smart contract also supports royalties so that NFT creators and artists can get paid for their work. Obviously, royalties in NFTs has been something that the Cardano NFT space has been discussing for a long time. This is sort of the idea that you could have a small payment, a small piece of the purchase price, go to the original NFT creator every time that NFT is sold. And if you think about this from an economics perspective, you can imagine how that would allow creators to lower the initial price at which they sell those NFTs because they know they're going to have this recurring royalty. It totally changes the economic picture. You could say that's good or bad, but this is an alternative approach where the creator would actually make some money on all of those trades. Finally, at long last, we're actually going to get our Cardano Summit 2021 NFTs. You all remember there were all these little tasks, challenges, if you will, in the Cardano Summit virtual world. There were, a bunch of pawns in the main land. And if you walked around in all the pawns with your avatar, you would complete a challenge that earned you, whatever little NFT. One of them was a turtle. Some of them were, sprites, butterflies. I can't remember what the things were, but there were a bunch of NFTs. And the idea was if you completed all these challenges and then you signed up at Terra Virtua, eventually you would get your NFTs. It looks like we're actually going to get these NFTs tomorrow, if I'm reading this correctly. That would be tomorrow as I record, but today as most of you are listening. This is a thread by Ed and Ada, who you can tell from the username is a member of the Cardano community. And we've talked in the past about some issues with Solana, how the documents that Solana put out seemed to imply that they would be using something that looked a lot like Casper FFG with slashing, but they didn't yet have slashing in place. So you have to kind of ask the question, okay, if you're going to use something that you say looks a lot like Casper FFG that requires slashing, but you're not using slashing yet, how are you actually operating your consensus protocol? We also talked about things like the very, very high hardware thresholds to run a Solana node and how it seemed like that would prevent any decent level of decentralization among the block validators. Finally, one of the most famous issues with Solana has been its tokenomics. It seems like there was an incredibly high concentration of Solana tokens owned by insiders and venture capitalists. And we've talked about how in the past that seemed to have led to bad results for some other blockchains. But this thread by Ed and Ada seems to also paint a picture that would imply that even Solana's one point they seem to love to market, their TPS, their speed, their scalability, transactions per second. This thread seems to indicate that even that may be a little bit of an illusion in that the way they're counting the TPS may not be the way you would expect a blockchain like Solana to be counting TPS. Ed and Ada starts out by recounting the infamous recent episode where the Solana blockchain went down for an extended period of time. Everybody in Cardano was kind of shocked because we were all like, hey, the one thing about blockchains is that they need to continue running transactions. You need to continue validating transactions. That's like job number one. Job number one is that you are able to continuously validate transactions. I'm not saying that there's zero chance the Cardano blockchain will ever go down, but hasn't happened yet. So we were all a little bit shocked. And it seemed like from the outside, what happened was they ran into a problem, and the answer was to turn the blockchain off. Again, something that inside Cardano, you can't really imagine ever happening with Cardano. Maybe that's just the research driven approach. All the issues have been thought of beforehand, at least as many as they could possibly, predict. Maybe Cardano is the exception, but in Solana, apparently problems can come up which require the blockchain to be turned off. Ed Nada tells us, while initial tweets by the official Solana support Twitter account suggested it was due to its mainnet beta network experiencing intermittent stability. You'll remember we covered this right after it happened on this channel. Solana Labs CEO Anatoly Yakovenko eventually attributed the network's failure to the overwhelming transaction volume. This, of course, is kind of startling because the whole thing with Solana seemed to be that they had sacrificed the decentralization leg of the blockchain trilemma so that they can maximize the scaling leg of the blockchain trilemma. And here we're being told they sort of failed to be able to scale to accommodate the transaction volume that had transpired. So Ed Nada kind of details exactly what happened. He says, a deeper analysis is warranted to understand the maladies plaguing Solana, and while it will take more than bug fixing, exclaimed, maybe he meant explained, by Yakovenko to correct the issue. And again, I'm just reading what Ed Nada is reporting here. I'm not representing any of this as fact. He says, Solana's claims, and here's where it gets really interesting. This is the crux of the issue, guys. Solana's claims of offering superior scalability as compared to Ethereum seem misleading when you consider how roughly, I think he meant roughly here, how roughly 80% of Solana's transactions are the chain's own consensus messages required simply to coordinate validators. This is extremely interesting. So a lot of you have been mentioning this to me over the last week or so. Even in the comments to the videos on the channel, a lot of people have mentioned this, and it's pretty important. So he's saying here, 80% of Solana's transactions aren't actually transactions as we would think of them in Cardano. They're actually consensus messages. So I take this to be the validators talking back and forth so they can actually reach a consensus. Maybe this helps solve some of our previous questions. In the past, we talked about how there was this mystery with Solana. It seemed that their documentation implied that they were going to use something that looked a lot like Casper with slashing, Casper FFG to be exact, with slashing, but there was no slashing yet. So it's like, how are you controlling malicious behavior? Well, maybe you control malicious behavior by using so much consensus messaging back and forth between validators that it actually makes up 80% of the transactions on your blockchain. So Ed Nada tells us these processes are typically handled separately from on-chain transactions via a distinct communications channel, but are inexplicably bundled with user transactions on Solana's blockchain. So messaging back and forth between validators has been around a long, long, long time in crypto. But as Ed Nada is pointing out here, usually that's done off-chain. It's not done on-chain. He says, examining the transaction numbers demonstrates this illusion. The much ballyhooed number of 400,000 TPS, that's transactions per second, is simply the amount of transactions that were attempted by bots. As for the transactions actually being written to the chain, so he's saying, hey, you've probably seen this 400,000 transactions per second number associated with Solana. If you have, that's actually just the number of transactions attempted by bots. If we're talking about the number of transactions actually written to the chain, and here we're using transactions in air quotes for a reason we're about to explain, we're talking about the actual number of transactions written to the chain. the number is 2,000 transactions per second. But again, remember, 80% of the transactions are consensus messaging, according to Ed Nada here. So that means 350 transactions per second are actually user transactions, and the rest were validator consensus messages. He says, Anatoly Yakovenko confirmed this by saying on Twitter, I don't think it was significantly higher than normal. He sums this up here by saying, hey, Solana's normal speed is 2,000 transactions per second, of which 80% are consensus messages. This is not the same kind of metric as the actual smart contract transactions or user transactions, where Ethereum shows their speeds at 15 transactions per second, or the higher TPS offered by a blockchain like Cardano. Here's where it again gets very interesting. He says, further, the massive amount of consensus messaging required in Solana grows exponentially, not linearly, as more Solana validators join the cluster. This is a big problem for Solana. That this huge amount of consensus messaging that apparently is happening on chain grows exponentially as you add more Solana validators. He says Solana's inherent protocol design that artificially inflates the TPS numbers is a large part of why the Solana chain was halted, went to 0 TPS for nearly 17 hours. The point where a chain loses consensus and crashes or must be stopped is its actual throughput. He says, hey, they can claim whatever throughput they want, but their actual throughput is where they can no longer maintain consensus. For Solana, that real number is around 2,000 TPS, but only 350 of those are actual user transactions that would be counted on any other blockchain. The weird part is, I don't think anybody would actually be mad if Solana from the start had come out and said, hey, we think our actual TPS is 350 transactions per second. People probably would have been cool about that. And again, I haven't dived into their blockchain to figure out exactly what I think their TPS is. I'm just relying on what's posted here by Ed and Ada. But the really big problem is that's not the number that has been projected out to us. That's not the number that we've been led to believe the Solana blockchain is operating at. And even that was accomplished at this cost. Look at this. Someone posted as a comment to this thread, this little image here that seems to be saying that a super minority of just 19 validators control more than 33% of the total stake. These entities could theoretically censor or halt the network. Obviously, that's not what I think a lot of us signed up for when we got involved in this blockchain stuff in the first place. When I see things like this, it makes me super happy that I'm involved in a blockchain where I can trust in the intellectual honesty of the people describing to me the capabilities of that blockchain. I think we're in for a good couple of months in Cardano, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.